Greg Evans never imagined a diplomatic handshake could lead to interstellar pregnancy. Yet here he was, Earth's lead negotiator, confined to his quarters on the Nigean homeworld as chaos erupted around him. It had started as a routine meeting. Earth's first contact with the Nigeans promised solutions to humanity's energy crisis in exchange for genetic material. The alien race faced a dire infertility epidemic threatening their very existence. Queen Zera, the Nigean monarch, proposed this controversial alliance during the summit's opening session. Skeptical of the offer's implications, Greg requested a private audience with Princess Vox, the Queen's daughter and chief scientific advisor. In the sleek, crystalline meeting chamber, Greg reached for a data tablet. His fingers brushed against Vox's hand. The princess recoiled, her iridescent scales flushing a deep purple. She fled the room without explanation, leaving Greg bewildered. Hours later, Nigean security forces burst into Greg's quarters. Their translucent armor glinted under the binary star's light streaming through the window. The lead officer's voice crackled through his respirator. "Human diplomat, you are under house arrest. Princess Vox is with child following your physical contact." Greg's mind reeled. How could a simple touch result in pregnancy? The Nigean sacred customs regarding royal bloodlines strictly forbade interspecies breeding. As he processed this information, reports flooded in of similar incidents across the diplomatic compound. Human handshakes, accidental brushes in corridors, each innocent contact had seemingly triggered Nigean pregnancies. The planet's population erupted in a maelstrom of emotions. Fear, curiosity, and hostility towards the human visitors spread like wildfire. Some Nigeans called for Greg's execution, viewing him as a contaminant to their species. Others saw this unexpected compatibility as a potential salvation for their dying race. Queen Zara demanded an emergency meeting with Earth's representatives. Greg could see the royal palace from his window, its twisting spires now surrounded by angry protesters. He knew the fragile peace between humans and Nigeans hung by a thread. As Greg paced his opulent prison, he grappled with the magnitude of his accidental discovery. Human Nigean compatibility could forge an unprecedented alliance or ignite an interstellar war. The fate of two worlds rested on his ability to navigate this crisis. He had to uncover the truth behind these sudden pregnancies. Were they a biological quirk or something more sinister? Greg's diplomatic skills would be pushed to their limits as he attempted to protect himself from Nigean extremists and prevent relations between the two species from deteriorating beyond repair. With each passing moment, the stakes grew higher. Greg Evans, the man who shook hands with alien princesses and triggered an interstellar pregnancy crisis, now held the key to humanity's future among the stars. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenges ahead. It was time to turn this diplomatic disaster into humanity's greatest triumph. Greg's mind raced as he processed the implications of his confinement. The sudden pregnancies triggered by human touch had thrown the entire diplomatic mission into chaos. As he paced his opulent quarters, a commotion outside caught his attention. Through the window, he observed a sleek shuttlecraft descending onto a nearby landing pad. The craft's doors hissed open, revealing a petite woman in a crisp lab coat. Dr. Emily Chen, Earth's foremost xenobiologist, had arrived. Greg watched as she was escorted into the compound by a contingent of nervous Nigean guards, their translucent armor reflecting the binary star's light. Hours passed before Greg received any news. Finally, his room's communication panel chimed. Chief Negotiator Marcus Holt's holographic form materialized, his expression grave. "Evans, we've convened an emergency meeting," Holt said, his voice tight with tension. "Dr. Chen is here to investigate these pregnancies. She'll need your full cooperation." Greg nodded, relief washing over him. "Of course. What's our next move?" "For now, maintain your house arrest. It's for your own safety as much as anything else. Use this time wisely, Evans. Study everything we have on Nigean biology and culture. There might be something we've overlooked." As the hologram flickered out, Greg threw himself into research. He pored over data files, historical records, and cultural briefings. Hours blended into days as he searched for any clue that might explain the unprecedented phenomenon. On the third day of his confinement, Greg stumbled upon an obscure text referencing an ancient Nigean legend. His eyes widened as he read about the celestial touch, a prophesied event that would save the Nigean species from extinction. The legend spoke of otherworldly beings whose mere touch would reawaken the Nigeans' ability to reproduce. Before Greg could delve deeper, alarms blared throughout the compound. The floor shook as explosions rocked the building. Shouts and the sound of energy weapons filled the air. Greg's door burst open. Dr. Chen rushed in, her lab coat singed and her face smeared with soot. "We have to go now," she yelled over the chaos. "What's happening?" Greg asked, already moving to follow her. "General Kraz and his extremists have staged a coup. They've taken Queen Zara prisoner and are after us next. Come on!" They sprinted down the corridor, dodging panicked diplomats and security personnel. As they rounded a corner, they collided with a familiar figure, Princess Vox. Her iridescent scales were dulled with stress, and her midsection showed a noticeable swell. "Thank the stars I found you," Vox panted. "Kraz's forces are everywhere. We need to escape." The trio made their way to the compound's vehicle bay, narrowly avoiding detection. Greg commandeered a Nigean transport, its controls alien but not incomprehensible. As energy blasts peppered the bay's doors, they sped out into the chaotic streets of the capital. "Where are we going?" Greg asked, deftly maneuvering through the panicked crowds. Dr. Chen pulled out a datapad, her fingers flying across its surface. "I've been in contact with a Nigean scientist named Dr. Zorn. He has a secret research facility in the jungle. It's our best chance to continue our work and find answers." As they left the city behind, the lush Nigean jungle enveloped them. The transport's repulsors hummed as they navigated through the dense foliage. Greg glanced at Vox, noting the worry etched on her alien features. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. Vox met his gaze, her multifaceted eyes shimmering with emotion. "I'm scared, Greg, for my people, for my mother, for our child." The weight of her words hung in the air. This unprecedented pregnancy was more than just a diplomatic crisis. It was deeply personal for both of them. After hours of tense travel, they arrived at a hidden entrance carved into a cliffside. Dr. Zorn, a wizened Nigean with pale, almost translucent scales, greeted them with obvious relief. "Quickly, inside," he ushered them, casting nervous glances at the sky. The facility was a marvel of Nigean technology, filled with equipment Greg could hardly comprehend. Dr. Chen immediately set to work with Dr. Zorn, their excited chatter filling the lab as they compared notes and began new tests. Greg's communicator chirped, displaying a coded message from Marcus Holt. His heart sank as he read the update. Earth's governments were split on how to respond to the crisis. Some pushed for military intervention, while others feared the diplomatic repercussions of such action. As Greg pondered this new complication, Dr. Chen's excited voice cut through his thoughts. "Greg, Vox, you need to see this." They hurried to her side, where a holographic display showed a complex DNA structure. "It's remarkable," Dr. Chen explained, her eyes alight with discovery. "Human touch activates a dormant gene in Nigean females. It's like a key fitting into a lock, restarting their reproductive systems." Dr. Zorn nodded enthusiastically. "I've theorized about this for years, but the conservative factions in our government silence my research. This proves that humans and Nigeans share a deep biological connection, perhaps even a common ancestor." The implications were staggering. Greg looked at Vox, seeing his own mix of awe and apprehension mirrored in her eyes. Their accidental touch hadn't just created a child, it had unlocked the potential salvation of an entire species. As the scientists continued their work, the distant sound of engines filled the air. Greg's heart raced as he realized the implications. General Kraz's forces had found them. "We need more time," Dr. Chen said, her voice tight with urgency. "We're close to stabilizing the pregnancy process, but we're not there yet." Greg's mind raced, weighing their options. They had to find a way to complete the research, overthrow Kraz, rescue Queen Zara, and present their findings to both species. The fate of human-Nigean relations, and possibly the future of both races, hung in the balance. As the sound of approaching vehicles grew louder, Greg locked eyes with Vox. In that moment, he realized that his feelings for her had grown beyond mere diplomatic duty. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. "All right," Greg said, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Let's get to work. We've got 2 worlds to save." The distant rumble of engines grew louder, sending a chill down Greg's spine. He turned to Dr. Chen and Dr. Zorn, who were hunched over a holographic display, their faces illuminated by its soft blue glow. "We need to move," Greg said, his voice tight with urgency. "Kraz's forces are getting closer." Dr. Chen looked up, her eyes wide with frustration. "We're so close to a breakthrough. Just a few more hours and—" An explosion rocked the facility, cutting her off mid-sentence. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling as alarms blared. "We don't have hours," Greg replied, already moving to gather their essential equipment. "We need to leave now." As they scrambled to evacuate, Dr. Chen's eyes widened. She grabbed a nearby data pad, her fingers flying across its surface. "Wait! Look at this!" Greg and Vox huddled around the screen. Complex molecular structures danced across it, rearranging themselves in a dizzying display. "I've identified a unique protein in human DNA," Dr. Chen explained, her voice breathless with excitement. "When introduced to Nigean physiology, it reactivates their dormant reproductive systems. I'm calling it the Taren factor." Vox gasped, her hand instinctively moving to her swollen abdomen. "This explains the pregnancies?" Dr. Chen nodded emphatically. "And it could be the key to solving your species' infertility crisis." Another explosion, closer this time, shook the room. Dr. Zorn hurried over, his pale scales glistening with sweat. "We must go. I know of an abandoned temple deep in the jungle. It contains advanced medical equipment that could help us continue our research." As they hurried through the facility's winding corridors, Greg's mind raced. The discovery of the Taren factor was monumental, but it would mean nothing if they couldn't escape Kraz's forces. They reached the vehicle bay just as the facility's outer defenses were breached. The sound of energy weapons and shouting filled the air. Greg helped Vox into their transport, her movements slow and labored. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern etched on his face. Vox nodded, but her expression was strained. "The pregnancy, it's progressing faster than I expected. I fear there may be complications." As they sped away from the facility, a Nigean scout ship appeared on their sensors. Greg's heart pounded as he maneuvered through the dense jungle, trying to lose their pursuer. "We need to hide our energy signature," Dr. Zorn said, his fingers dancing across the transport's control panel. "Greg, help me modify the shield emitters. We can create a makeshift cloaking device using a combination of our technologies." For tense minutes, Greg and Dr. Zorn worked feverishly, rerouting power and reconfiguring systems. Just as the scout ship closed in, their jury-rigged cloaking device hummed to life. They held their breath as the Nigean vessel passed overhead, its sensors unable to detect them. As they continued their journey deeper into the jungle, Vox's condition deteriorated. She writhed in pain, her scales shifting from their usual iridescent hue to a sickly pale green. Dr. Chen ran a medical scanner over Vox's body, her expression growing more concerned with each passing moment. "The hybrid fetus is developing too rapidly," she announced grimly. "Her body can't keep up." Greg felt a surge of protectiveness wash over him. He took Vox's hand, surprised by the strength of his emotions. "What can we do?" "We need to reach that temple," Dr. Chen replied. "The medical equipment there might be our only hope of stabilizing her condition." As they pushed deeper into the jungle, the vegetation grew denser, and strange bioluminescent plants cast an eerie glow over their path. Greg refused to leave Vox's side, holding her hand and offering words of comfort as she drifted in and out of consciousness. During a rare moment of lucidity, Vox turned to Greg, her multifaceted eyes shimmering with emotion. "Tell me about Earth," she whispered. "About your home." Greg found himself opening up, sharing stories of his childhood in the rolling hills of Virginia, of summer thunderstorms and the smell of freshly cut grass. Vox listened intently, her pain momentarily forgotten as she lost herself in visions of a world so different from her own. As night fell, they encountered an unexpected sight. A group of Nigeans emerged from the undergrowth, their scales a mottled pattern that blended perfectly with the jungle. Unlike the Nigeans Greg had met in the capital, These individuals wore simple, organic clothing and carried primitive-looking weapons. Dr. Zorn gasped in recognition. The outcasts, I thought they were just a legend. An elderly Nigel stepped forward, her movements graceful despite her advanced age. I am Kala, she announced, her voice carrying the weight of ancient wisdom. We have been watching you. Come, your friend needs our help. With few other options, Greg and his companions followed Kala and her people to a hidden village nestled in the canopy of massive trees. There, Kala shared ancient Nigean healing techniques that helped stabilize Vox's condition. As Vox rested, Kala explained their history. We are the descendants of those who refused to abandon our spiritual beliefs when our species turned to pure science. We have preserved the old ways, living in harmony with the jungle and the planet. Greg listened, fascinated by this glimpse into Nigean culture. He couldn't help but draw parallels to similar divides in human history. With Vox's condition temporarily stabilized, they set out for the ancient temple at first light. Kala and a small group of outcasts accompanied them, offering protection and guidance through the treacherous jungle. As they traveled, Greg's communicator chirped with an encrypted message. His heart raced as he decoding it, recognizing Marcus Holt's signature. The message was brief but alarming. A faction within the human government was planning a military intervention on Nige. Greg shared the news with Dr. Chen, their expressions grim. The stakes had just gotten higher. They needed to complete their research and find a way to present their findings to both species before it was too late. After a grueling journey, they finally reached the ancient temple. Its massive stone structures were overgrown with vegetation, but Greg could still make out intricate carvings depicting what looked like early Nigean history. As they entered the temple's main chamber, dormant systems hummed to life, responding to Dr. Zorn's presence. Advanced medical equipment, far beyond anything Greg had seen before, lined the walls. Dr. Chen and Dr. Zorn immediately set to work, using the temple's equipment to synthesize the Taren factor protein and develop a treatment for the Nigean population. Greg, drawing on his diplomatic skills, began formulating a plan to present their findings to both Nigean and human authorities. Vox's condition improved with the help of the temple's medical technology, but she remained weak. Greg stayed by her side, their bond growing stronger with each passing hour. As the sun set on their first day in the temple, Greg stood at a high window, looking out over the vast jungle. Somewhere out there, General Kraz's forces were searching for them. Queen Zara was in hiding, possibly with vital information about Nigean origins. And now Marcus Holt was on Nige, likely making his way through this very jungle. Greg took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenges ahead. They had made incredible progress, but the most difficult part was yet to come. With multiple factions converging on their location and the fate of two species hanging in the balance, Greg knew that every decision, every action in the coming days would be crucial. He turned back to the room, watching Dr. Chen and Dr. Zorn work tirelessly at their stations, Vox resting peacefully nearby, and the outcast Nigans standing guard at the temple's entrance. Despite the dire circumstances, Greg felt a glimmer of hope. They had assembled an unlikely team, bridging gaps between cultures and species. If they could do it, perhaps there was hope for lasting peace between humans and Nigans. As night fell over the jungle, Greg returned to Vox's side, taking her hand in his. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Together. As Greg's eyes met Vox's, a silent understanding passed between them. Their journey was nowhere near the end. A triumphant shout from Dr. Chen drew their attention. "We've done it!" she exclaimed, her face glowing with excitement. "The Taren factor protein is stabilized. We can synthesize the treatment for the pregnant Nigeans." Greg's heart raced as he watched Dr. Chen and Dr. Zorn work in perfect synchronization, their hands flying over the ancient Nigean equipment. Within hours, they had produced the first batch of the treatment. "Princess Vox," Dr. Chen said, approaching with a vial of iridescent liquid. "With your permission, we'd like to administer the treatment to you first." Vox nodded, her scales shimmering with a mix of fear and hope. Greg held her hand as Dr. Chen carefully injected the treatment. For a tense moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then Vox gasped, her body relaxing visibly. "The pain, it's subsiding," she whispered, wonder in her voice. As they monitored Vox's condition, a commotion at the temple entrance caught Greg's attention. He tensed, ready for a fight, but relaxed when he saw a familiar face. "Marcus!" Greg exclaimed, rushing to greet his old friend. Marcus Holt, looking haggard but determined, entered the chamber with a small team of operatives. "Greg," Marcus replied, clasping his hand, "we've got a situation. The human government is planning a military intervention on Nige. We need to act fast." As Marcus briefed them on the impending crisis, Greg's mind raced. They had the cure, but how could they disseminate it in time to prevent an interstellar war? Dr. Zorn's voice cut through his thoughts. "The temple's communication array," he said, eyes wide with realization. "If we can integrate it with your human technology, we might be able to create a transmitter powerful enough to reach both Nige and Earth." Greg and Marcus exchanged a look. "Let's do it," Greg said. For the next several hours, they worked tirelessly to repurpose the ancient Nigean technology. Greg marveled at the seamless collaboration between humans and Nigeans, each bringing their unique knowledge to the task. As they neared completion, a distant rumble shook the temple. Greg's blood ran cold as he recognized the sound of Nigean assault vehicles. "Kraz," he muttered, "he's found us." Marcus quickly organized their defenses, positioning his team and the outcast Nigeans at key points around the temple. Greg helped Vox to a protected area, his heart heavy with the knowledge that he might have to leave her to fight. "Be careful," Vox said, gripping his hand tightly. The first wave of Kraz's forces hit like a thunderstorm. Energy weapons sizzled through the air, leaving scorch marks on the ancient stone walls. Greg found himself fighting side by side with Marcus, their years of training evident in their fluid movements. Just as it seemed they might be overwhelmed, a group of Nigean scientists burst into the temple, carrying advanced weaponry. "We're here to help," their leader shouted over the din of battle. "We've been working against Kraz in secret." With the added firepower and the scientists' knowledge of Nigean defense systems, they managed to push back Kraz's forces. But Greg knew it was only temporary. In a lull between attacks, Vox approached him, her movement stronger than before. "There's something I need to show you," she said, leading him to a hidden chamber within the temple. Inside, Vox activated an ancient console. The air hummed with energy as a powerful force field enveloped the temple, repelling Kraz's next assault. "We're safe for now," Vox said, "but we need to hurry." Greg nodded, rushing back to the main chamber where Marcus and the others were preparing the broadcast. They quickly compiled all their evidence: Dr. Chen's research, footage of the successful treatments, and historical records that Queen Zara had managed to smuggle out of the capital. Just as they were about to transmit, alarms blared from their equipment. "Kraz has activated a planet-wide communication jammer," Dr. Zorn announced, his voice tight with frustration. For a moment, despair threatened to overwhelm Greg. Then Dr. Zorn's eyes lit up with an idea. "We could hijack one of Kraz's own satellites," he said. "With my knowledge of Nigean systems and your human hacking techniques, we might be able to bypass the jamming." Greg and Marcus exchanged a look. It was risky, but they were out of options. "We'll need to infiltrate a communication hub," Marcus said. As they prepared for the mission, Vox approached Greg. "I'm coming with you," she said, her tone brooking no argument. "My access codes and knowledge of Nigean technology could be crucial." Greg wanted to protest, to keep her safe, but he knew she was right. They needed every advantage they could get. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Chen pulled Greg aside. "Be careful," she said. "Remember, the fate of both our species rests on this mission." Greg nodded, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. He looked at his team. Marcus, battle-ready and determined. Vox, her scales shimmering with renewed strength. And the small group of human operatives and Nigean scientists who had volunteered for the mission. They slipped out of the temple under the cover of darkness, the sounds of battle fading behind them as they plunged into the dense Nigean jungle. Greg knew that somewhere out there, Queen Zara was rallying her own forces, fighting to reclaim her throne and save her people. As they approached the outskirts of the communication hub, its massive dish arrays silhouetted against the alien sky, Greg felt a mix of fear and commitment. The facility was heavily guarded, dripping with weaponry and surrounded by energy barriers. "This is it," he said, turning to his team. "Everything we've fought for comes down to this moment. Are we ready?" The answering looks of determination on both human and Nigean faces told him all he needed to know. As one, they began to move towards the facility, the fate of two worlds hanging in the balance. Balance. As one, they began to move towards the facility, the fate of two worlds hanging in the air. Greg led the team through the dense undergrowth, their footsteps muffled by the spongy Nigean soil. The communication hub loomed before them, a towering structure of metal and energy barriers that pulsed with an eerie blue light. "Vox," Greg whispered, "what can you tell us about the security measures?" Princess Vox's eyes narrowed as she studied the facility. 3 layers of energy barriers, automated defense turrets, and at least 24 elite guards patrolling the perimeter. Marcus nodded, his expression grim. "My team can handle the guards, but we'll need your access codes to get through those barriers." They split into 3 groups. Marcus and his operatives would create a diversion, while Greg, Vox, and 2 Nigean scientists would infiltrate the main control room. The third team, led by a human tech expert, would disable the hub's external communications to prevent Kraz from calling for reinforcements. As Marcus's team engaged the guards with a series of explosive charges, Greg and Vox sprinted towards the first energy barrier. Vox placed her hand on a concealed scanner, her scales glowing faintly as the barrier shimmered and dissolved. "Impressive," Greg muttered as they rushed through. They encountered heavy resistance at the second barrier. Elite guards, their armor gleaming in the facility's harsh lights, opened fire with energy weapons. Greg and Vox dove for cover behind a row of storage containers. "We need to get closer to the access panel," Vox shouted over the din of battle. Greg nodded, reaching for a small device on his belt. "Cover your eyes," he warned before tossing it towards the guards. A blinding flash erupted, disorienting their attackers. Using the confusion to their advantage, they sprinted to the second barrier. Vox's fingers flew over the access panel, her royal codes bypassing layers of security protocols. The barrier fell, and they pushed forward. Inside the facility, alarms blared as they fought their way through corridors, filled with panicked technicians and security personnel. Greg's combat training and Vox's knowledge of Nigean technology proved a formidable combination. Finally, they reached the central control room. Greg's heart sank as he saw the new security measures in place. A large screen displayed General Kraz's face, sneering down at them. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" Kraz's voice boomed through the speakers. "Only my personal authorization can grant access to the satellite controls now." Greg's mind raced, searching for a solution. Then an idea struck him. "Vox, can you access the emergency broadcast system from here?" She nodded, her fingers already moving across the control panel. "What do you have in mind?" "We're going to lure Kraz here," Greg explained, outlining his plan to the team. Moments later, Vox's voice echoed across the planet. "Attention, citizens of Nige. This is Princess Vox. I have been captured by the human intruders. General Kraz, if you wish to save me and eliminate the human threat, come to the communication hub immediately. This is not a trick. I repeat, this is not a trick." Greg couldn't help but smile at the irony in her last words. "Now we wait," he said, turning to Marcus. "Set up defensive positions. Kraz won't come alone." As they prepared for Kraz's arrival, Greg received an urgent communication from Dr. Chen at the temple. Her face appeared on a small holographic display, excitement evident in her features. "Greg, you won't believe what we've discovered," she said breathlessly. "The Taren factor protein doesn't just stabilize Nigean pregnancies, it enhances their entire immune system. We might be looking at a significant extension of Nigean lifespans." The implications of this discovery whirled through Greg's mind. If true, it could change everything, not just for the Nigeans, but for human-Nigean relations as well. Before he could fully process this information, Marcus's voice crackled over the comm. "Incoming! Kraz is here and he's brought an army!" Greg rushed to a window, his heart pounding as he saw the approaching forces. Kraz's personal shuttle descended from the sky, flanked by assault vehicles and hundreds of troops. "Everyone to your positions," Greg ordered. "Remember, we need to hold them off long enough to complete the broadcast." The battle erupted with a ferocity that shook the entire facility. Marcus and his team, along with their Nigean allies, fought with everything they had. Energy weapons sizzled through the air, punctuated by the thunder of explosions. Inside the control room, Greg and Vox worked feverishly to prepare the broadcast. They compiled footage of successful treatments, Dr. Chen's latest discoveries, and historical records proving the shared ancestry of humans and Nigeans. As the fighting intensified, systems throughout the facility began to fail. Sparks flew from damaged consoles, and the lights flickered ominously. "We're losing power to the main transmitter," Vox shouted, her fingers flying over the controls. Greg made a split-second decision. "Keep working on the broadcast. I'm going to try something." He opened a direct communication channel to Kraz's forces. The general's face appeared on the screen, contorted with rage. "General Kraz," Greg began, forcing his voice to remain calm, "I urge you to cease this attack. We have evidence that could change everything for your people." "Lies," Kraz spat. "You're here to destroy us, to finish what your ancestors started millennia ago." "No," Greg insisted. "We're here to help. The Taren factor, it's not just about fertility. It could extend Nigean lifespans, make your people stronger than ever before." For a moment, doubt flickered across Kraz's face, but then his expression hardened. "Enough! I will not be deceived by human trickery." The general barked orders to his troops, and the assault on the control room intensified. Greg could hear the chaos outside, the sound of Marcus's team fighting desperately to hold their position. Just when it seemed they would be overrun, a new voice cut through the din of battle. "This is Queen Zara," it announced, strong and clear. "All loyal Nigeans, stand down. General Kraz, your coup is over." Greg watched in amazement as Kraz's forces began to lower their weapons, confusion and uncertainty replacing their battle fury. But Kraz himself was far from finished. The general burst into the control room, his massive form filling the doorway. "If I can't have Nige," he roared, "no one will." He lunged for the main control panel, his fingers poised to trigger the self-destruct sequence for the entire communication network. Greg and Vox moved as one, tackling the general before he could reach the controls. In the ensuing struggle, consoles sparked and shattered. Alarms blared as system after system began to fail. Greg could see the broadcast signal flickering, threatening to cut out entirely. "Vox," he shouted, grappling with Kraz, "the broadcast!" Princess Vox fought her way to the main console, her movements fluid despite the chaos around her. With one hand, she entered the final command sequence to transmit their message. With the other, she desperately tried to stabilize the failing systems. As Greg finally subdued Kraz with the help of Marcus, who had fought his way to the control room, he looked up to see Vox standing before the main screen. Her scales shimmered with dedication as she held the failing systems together through sheer force of will. The broadcast began to transmit, reaching out across Nige and beyond to the waiting diplomats on Earth. But as the signal streamed out into space, carrying with it the hope for a new era of human-Nigean relations, the control room systems continued to deteriorate. Greg joined Vox at the console, their hands moving in tandem as they fought to maintain the signal. Outside, the sounds of battle had given way to an eerie silence as Nigeans across the planet tuned into the broadcast. The fate of two species now hung on a fragile transmission, streaming out from a failing communication hub on a war-torn planet. Greg and Vox stood side by side, their eyes fixed on the flickering signal strength indicator, knowing that every second the broadcast remained active could mean the difference between war and peace, between isolation and a new era of cooperation between their peoples. Greg and Vox's eyes remained glued to the signal strength indicator, their breath held in tense anticipation. Suddenly, a thunderous crash echoed through the control room as General Kraz burst through a damaged wall panel. His eyes blazed with fury as he charged towards the main console. "I'll destroy it all," he roared, raising a massive fist to smash the delicate equipment. Greg's body moved on instinct, honed by months of grueling training on Nige. He launched himself at Kraz, colliding with the general's muscular form and sending them both tumbling across the floor. They grappled fiercely, Greg's newly developed strength allowing him to hold his own against the larger Nigean. "Vox, keep the broadcast going," Greg shouted as he struggled to pin Kraz's arms. Princess Vox's fingers flew across the controls, her scales pulsing with commitment as she fought to stabilize the failing systems. Sparks erupted from damaged consoles around her, but she remained focused on her task. Greg and Kraz rolled across the floor, narrowly missing jagged pieces of debris. The general's superior strength began to show as he forced Greg onto his back, hands reaching for the human's throat. In that moment, Greg's diplomatic training kicked in. He locked eyes with Kraz, forcing his voice to remain calm despite the pressure on his windpipe. "General, think about what you're doing. This broadcast could save your people." Kraz's grip faltered for a split second, doubt flickering across his face. Greg seized the opportunity, twisting his body and using Kraz's own momentum to flip their positions. With a final surge of effort, he pinned the general to the ground. "Vox, now!" Greg called out. Princess Vox moved swiftly, retrieving a set of Nigean restraints from a nearby security station. She quickly secured Kraz's hands and feet, effectively neutralizing the threat. With the general subdued, Greg rushed back to the main console. "How's the broadcast?" Vox's eyes narrowed as she studied the readouts. "The signal's weak, but it's still transmitting. We need to boost it somehow." Greg scanned the damaged equipment, his mind racing. What if we reroute power from the building's auxiliary systems? It might give us the boost we need. Vox nodded, her fingers already moving to implement the plan. "Good idea. I'll need to bypass some safety protocols, but it should work." As they worked feverishly to stabilize the signal, the room filled with the smell of ozone and burnt circuitry. Greg's hands flew over unfamiliar Nigean controls, guided by Vox's rapid-fire instructions. Slowly but surely, the signal strength began to climb. "It's working!" Vox exclaimed, her scales shimmering with excitement. Outside the control room, the sounds of battle had given way to an eerie silence. Greg could almost feel the weight of millions of eyes, both Nigean and human, fixed on screens across two worlds, absorbing the crucial information streaming from their battered console. As the final seconds of the broadcast ticked away, Greg and Vox stood side by side, their bodies tense with anticipation. When the transmission complete indicator finally flashed, they shared a moment of stunned silence before erupting into relieved laughter. Their celebration was cut short by the sound of approaching footsteps. Greg tensed, ready for another fight, but relaxed when he saw Marcus leading a group of soldiers into the room. "The building is secure," Marcus reported, his eyes widening as he took in the scene of destruction. "And you won't believe who just arrived." Before Greg could ask, a regal figure swept into the control room, flanked by a contingent of loyalist guards. Queen Zara's presence seemed to fill the space, her eyes blazing with a mixture of relief and dedication. "Well done, all of you," she said, her voice carrying the weight of authority. Her gaze fell on the restrained form of General Kraz. "Take him away. He'll face justice for his actions." As Kraz was led out, Queen Zara turned to Greg, Marcus, and Princess Vox. "We have much to discuss. The capital is secure, but there's still much work to be done to stabilize the situation." Greg nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle back onto his shoulders. "Your Majesty, I believe our next steps will be crucial in shaping the future of human-Nigean relations." As they began to discuss strategy, Greg's communicator chirped. Dr. Chen's excited voice filled the room. "Greg, the treatments are working. We've successfully treated a large group of Nigean females, including some previously thought to be infertile. The results are beyond our most optimistic projections." The news sent a ripple of excitement through the room. Queen Zara's eyes shone with hope for her people's future. "This changes everything," she said softly. Over the next few hours, reports flooded in from across Nige and Earth. The broadcast had been received far and wide, and its impact was immediate. On Nige, citizens who had been hostile towards humans were now cautiously optimistic, On Earth, government officials scrambled to respond to this dramatic shift in interstellar relations. As Greg coordinated with Earth's hastily assembled diplomatic delegation, he found himself at the center of a whirlwind of activity. The creation of a joint human-Nigean council became his primary focus, a delicate balancing act of diplomacy and trust-building. Throughout it all, Princess Vox remained by his side, her insights into Nigean culture proving invaluable. Greg couldn't help but notice the way her scales shimmered when she spoke passionately about the future of their two species, or how her hand would occasionally brush against his as they pored over plans and proposals. As the first joint medical centers were established across Niger, the initial results were even more promising than anyone had dared hope. Nigerian females who had struggled for years to conceive were now experiencing successful pregnancies. The mood across the planet shifted from cautious optimism to outright celebration. Yet amidst the triumph, Greg faced a growing personal dilemma. His mission on Niger was technically complete, and Earth was calling for his return. But the thought of leaving filled him with an unexpected sense of loss. He had come to care deeply for the Nigerian people, and for Princess Vox in particular. As he prepared for a crucial meeting with the Joint Council, Greg found himself standing alone on a balcony overlooking the capital city. The alien landscape stretched out before him, no longer strange but filled with possibilities. He thought of Earth, of his duty, and the life he had left behind. Then he thought of Niger, of the work still to be done and the connections he had forged. The weight of his upcoming decision pressed heavily on him as he reviewed his notes for the council meeting. His recommendations would shape the course of human-Nigerian relations for generations to come. As he turned to head back inside, Greg squared his shoulders, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead in this new era of interstellar cooperation. Greg was about to enter the council chamber when his communicator buzzed urgently. Dr. Chen's face appeared on the screen, her expression grave. "Greg, we have a situation at the temple. Some of the treated Nigerian females are experiencing complications." His heart sank as he listened to her explain the accelerated fetal growth and the risks it posed. The progress they'd made, the hope they'd kindled, it all threatened to unravel. "I'm on my way," Greg said, already striding towards the nearest transport pod. He caught sight of Princess Vox and motioned for her to join him. "The council meeting will have to wait." As their pod zipped through the towering spires of the Nigerian capital, Greg briefed Vox on the situation. Her scales pulsed with concern, a deep blue rippling across her skin. "This could undo everything we've worked for," she said softly. Greg nodded, his face hardened. "We won't let that happen." They arrived at the ancient temple to find it transformed into a hive of anxious activity. Nigerian females crowded the entrance, their swollen abdomens a stark reminder of what was at stake. Dr. Chen and Dr. Zorn moved swiftly between patients, their faces etched with concentration. Greg and Vox wasted no time. They donned protective gear and plunged into the fray, assisting where they could. Greg's understanding of human physiology complemented Vox's knowledge of Nigerian biology, allowing them to bridge gaps in the medical team's approach. Hours blurred together as they worked tirelessly. Greg found himself cradling a Nigerian infant, born weeks too early, yet miraculously alive. The child's scales shimmered weakly, its tiny claws gripping his finger with surprising strength. "Greg, look at this," Dr. Chen called, gesturing to a hollow display. "We've isolated a genetic marker present in the most severely affected patients." As they studied the data, a realization dawned. The complications weren't universal. They were tied to a specific Nigerian genetic variant. It was a breakthrough, but one that came with a new set of challenges. Outside the temple, the mood on Niger was shifting. News of the complications spread like wildfire, fanning the embers of anti-human sentiment. Greg's communicator buzzed constantly with updates from Marcus and Queen Zara, each message more urgent than the last. "The Planetary Council is in an uproar," Zara reported, her usually composed voice tinged with stress. "They're calling for an immediate suspension of the Taren Factor program." Greg's mind raced, weighing options and consequences. He turned to Vox, seeing his own perseverance mirrored in her eyes. "We need to modify the Taren Factor protein," he said. "Make it compatible with that genetic marker." Vox nodded, already moving towards the lab equipment. It's possible, but we'll need more advanced tools than what we have here. The main hospital in the capital, Greg said, the plan forming as he spoke. They have what we need. But even as the words left his mouth, another message came through. The capital was in lockdown, crowds gathering in the streets, their anger palpable even through the grainy hollow feed. Greg steeled himself, knowing what had to be done. I'm going in, he announced to the room. We need that equipment, and I have the best chance of getting through. Vox stepped forward, her scales shimmering with commitment. I'm coming with you. For a moment, Greg wanted to protest. The danger was real, and Vox carried the hope of two species within her. But he recognized the look in her eyes, the same one he saw in the mirror each morning. They assembled a small team, 2 human scientists and 2 Nigean medical technicians. As they prepared to leave, Queen Zara herself arrived at the temple, her regal bearing at odds with the worry in her eyes. The council has voted, she said without preamble. They want all humans expelled from Nige. I've bought you some time, but you have less than 2 planetary rotations before the order takes effect. The weight of 2 worlds settled on Greg's shoulders as he nodded. We'll make it count, Your Majesty. Their small team slipped out of the temple under cover of darkness, using service tunnels and back alleys to navigate the increasingly hostile city. Greg's diplomatic training had never prepared him for anything like this. Skulking through an alien metropolis, the fate of interstellar relations hanging by a thread. They encountered pockets of resistance and support along the way. Some Nigeans, recognizing Vox, offered shelter and assistance. Others, their scales dark with anger, tried to block their path. As they approached the hospital, the true scale of their challenge became clear. A cordon of guards surrounded the building, their weapons gleaming in the harsh light of Nige's twin moons. Greg exchanged a look with Vox. This was it, the moment that would define the future of human-Nigean relations. With a deep breath, he stepped forward, ready to put everything on the line for the alliance he'd worked so hard to build. The guards tensed as Greg approached, their weapons raised. He raised his hands slowly, his voice calm and clear as he began to speak. Everything hinged on what happened next. The lives of countless Nigean mothers and children, the future of 2 species, and the dream of a united galaxy. As Greg's words hung in the air, the guards looked to each other, uncertainty flickering across their scaled faces. The fate of Nige balanced on a knife's edge, with Greg and his team poised to either save their fragile alliance or watch it crumble before their eyes. Greg's words seemed to hang in the air for an eternity. The guards exchanged glances, their scales shifting colors in the moonlight. Finally, the lead guard lowered his weapon. Princess Vox, he said, his voice a mix of reverence and uncertainty. We didn't know you were with them. Vox stepped forward, her regal bearing on full display. These humans are here to help our people. We must get to the hospital's labs immediately. The guards parted, allowing Greg and his team to pass. As they entered the hospital, Greg could feel the weight of their stares on his back. The halls were a flurry of activity, medical staff rushing between rooms filled with anxious Nigean mothers-to-be. Greg led his team to the main research lab, where state-of-the-art equipment hummed with potential. All right, Greg said, his voice steady despite the pressure. Let's get to work. The next hours were a blur of activity. Greg and Vox worked side by side, their movements in sync as they manipulated complex molecular structures on holographic displays. The human scientists provided insights on Taren biology, while the Nigean technicians offered crucial data on their species' genetic makeup. As the twin sons of Nige began to peek over the horizon, Greg stepped back from the console, rubbing his tired eyes. I think we've got it, he said, his voice hoarse from hours of discussion and debate. Vox nodded, her scales shimmering with a mix of exhaustion and hope. The modified protein should be compatible with the problematic genetic marker, but we need to test it. As if on cue, Dr. Chen entered the lab, leading a group of Nigean females. Their swollen abdomens and anxious expressions spoke volumes about the stakes of this moment. These brave volunteers have agreed to undergo the trial, Dr. Chen explained. They understand the risks, but they're willing to take the chance for the sake of their children and our people's future. Greg met each volunteer's eyes, seeing fear, hope, and grit in their alien faces. "Thank you," he said simply. "We'll do everything in our power to help you and your children." The administration of the modified Taren factor was a tense affair. Greg and his team moved from patient to patient, carefully injecting the new formula and monitoring for any adverse reactions. The volunteers lay on biobeds, their vital signs displayed on hovering hollow screens above them. As they waited for results, Greg's communicator buzzed. It was Marcus Holt. "Greg, I've got something," Marcus said, his face grim on the small screen. "We've uncovered evidence of Sabotage, a group of extremists led by Commander Vex, Kraz's former second-in-command, has been tampering with the Taren factor treatments." Greg's stomach dropped. "That explains the complications. Have you informed Queen Zara?" Marcus nodded. "She's been briefed. But Greg, things are getting tense out there. There's a mob gathering outside the hospital, demanding all humans be expelled from Nige." As if to punctuate Marcus's words, a distant roar of angry voices reached Greg's ears. He moved to the window, seeing a sea of agitated Nagians filling the streets below. "Keep me posted," Greg said, ending the call. He turned back to the lab where Vox was intently studying a patient's readings. "Greg, look at this," she called, excitement in her voice. "The modified Taren factor is working. The accelerated fetal growth is stabilizing." Hope surged through Greg as he examined the data. One by one, the volunteers' conditions began to improve. The modified treatment was a success. But their victory was short-lived. An alarm blared through the hospital, and Queen Zara's face appeared on the lab's main screen. "Gregory, Princess Vox," she said, her usual composure strained. "The situation outside is deteriorating. Commander Vex's supporters are inciting violence. We're struggling to maintain order." Greg's mind raced. They had the solution, but with an angry mob outside and time running out before the expulsion deadline, how could they get the word out? "Your Majesty," Greg said, an idea forming, "we need to broadcast the results of our trial to the entire planet. Can you get us access to the hospital's communication systems?" Queen Zara nodded. "It will be done. But hurry, Gregory. The Council is reconvening to vote on the expulsion order." As the Queen's image faded, Greg turned to his team. "We need to prepare a presentation. Fast. Visual evidence, medical data, everything we've got. We're going to show Nige the truth." The lab erupted into action once more. Greg and Vox worked furiously to compile their findings, while Dr. Chen prepared the volunteers for the broadcast. Outside, the roar of the crowd grew louder, punctuated by the occasional sound of energy weapons discharging. Finally, they were ready. Greg stood before the camera, Vox at his side, with the treated Nigean females behind them. He took a deep breath, knowing that the fate of two worlds hung on what he was about to say. "People of Nige," he began, his voice carried to every corner of the planet. "I am Gregory Nash, human diplomat and friend to your world. What you are about to see is the truth about the Taren factor treatment." As Greg spoke, presenting irrefutable evidence of the treatment's success, he could almost feel the tide of public opinion beginning to turn. But their broadcast had also caught the attention of their enemies. Alarms blared once more as Commander Vex and his loyalists launched their desperate attack on the hospital. The sounds of combat echoed through the corridors as Queen Zara's forces engaged the attackers. Greg's presentation was cut short as the lab's doors burst open. Commander Vex himself stood in the doorway, his scales dark with rage, a plasma weapon clutched in his clawed hand. "You've ruined everything," Vex snarled, raising his weapon. Greg moved instinctively, placing himself between Vex and the others. But before either of them could act, Vox cried out in pain. "Greg," she gasped, clutching her abdomen. "The baby, it's coming." In that moment of distraction, Marcus Holt appeared behind Vex, disarming the commander with a swift strike. As Vex was subdued, Greg rushed to Vox's side, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. "Hold on," he said, supporting her as she sank to the floor. "We're going to get through this." As chaos reigned around them, Greg found himself facing the greatest challenge of his life, protecting the woman he loved, defending the future of two species, and bringing a new life into the universe that would change everything. Everything that would change the course of two worlds. As Vox's cries of pain echoed through the lab, Greg sprang into action. "We need a medical team here now," he shouted, supporting Vox as she lowered herself to the floor. Dr. Chen rushed over, her face a mask of concentration. "The baby's coming fast," she announced, scanning Vox with a handheld medical device. "We don't have time to move her." The next few minutes were a blur of activity. Medical staff poured into the room, setting up emergency equipment around Vox. Greg held her hand, his eyes locked on hers as she fought through each contraction. "You're doing great," he murmured, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Just hold on." Outside, the sounds of conflict began to fade as Queen Zara's forces gained the upper hand. Marcus Holt stood guard at the door, his weapon at the ready, while the subdued Commander Vex glared from the corner where he was restrained. With a final, powerful push, Vox gave birth to a tiny wriggling form. The room fell silent for a moment, then erupted in gasps of wonder as the hybrid child let out its first cry. Dr. Chen cradled the newborn, her eyes wide with amazement. "It's incredible," she breathed, gently placing the child in Vox's arms. Greg stared in awe at the tiny being. The baby had Vox's iridescent scales, but they were interspersed with patches of soft, human-like skin. Its eyes, when they fluttered open, were a striking mix of Nigean vertical pupils and human irises. "She's perfect," Vox whispered, her scales shimmering with joy and exhaustion. As the new family shared this tender moment, Queen Zara entered the lab, her regal presence filling the room. She took in the scene before her, her eyes softening as they fell on the newborn. "This child," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "is the future of both our peoples." In the days that followed, news of the successful birth spread across Nige like wildfire. The modified Taren factor treatment was hailed as a miracle, and demand for it skyrocketed. Greg found himself at the center of a whirlwind of activity as he worked to implement a planet-wide distribution plan. The Joint Council reconvened in an emergency session, with Greg presenting his comprehensive strategy for global administration of the treatment. "We need to establish treatment centers across Niege," he explained, gesturing to a holographic map of the planet. "Each center will be staffed by both human and Nigean medical professionals, ensuring we have the expertise to handle any complications that may arise." Queen Zara nodded her approval. "Earth has agreed to send additional personnel and equipment to support this effort," she added. "But we must move quickly. Our people cannot afford any further delays." As the council deliberated, Greg's mind raced with the logistical challenges ahead. Nige's diverse environments, from sprawling underwater cities to densely forested mountain regions, would require careful planning to ensure equal access to the treatment. The council's decision was unanimous. Greg's plan was approved, and he was given full authority to oversee its implementation. As the meeting adjourned, he felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Over the next few weeks, Greg worked tirelessly, coordinating with human and Nigean teams to set up treatment centers across the planet. He traveled extensively, visiting remote locations to ensure smooth operations and address local concerns. During a visit to a newly established center in Nige's northern continent, Greg encountered a group of protesters. Their scales dark with anger, they shouted anti-human slogans as he approached. "Go back to your own world," one of them yelled, his voice filled with venom. "We don't need your help." Greg paused, taking a deep breath before addressing the crowd. "I understand your concerns," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But I ask you to look at the results. Healthy Nigean children are being born every day because of this treatment. We're not here to change who you are, but to help your people thrive." As he spoke, a Nigean woman emerged from the treatment center, cradling a newborn child. The protesters fell silent, their eyes fixed on the healthy, squirming infant. "This is what we're fighting for," Greg continued, gesturing to the mother and child. "A future where Nige's children can grow and prosper." The tension in the air slowly dissipated, and Greg saw several of the protesters lower their signs. It was a small victory, but one that gave him hope for the future. As the treatment centers began operations in earnest, reports of successful pregnancies and births flooded in from across the planet. Nigeria was experiencing a baby boom unlike anything in recent memory, with birth rates soaring to unprecedented levels. This sudden population surge brought its own set of challenges. Greg found himself in meetings with Nigean city planners and infrastructure experts, discussing how to rapidly expand housing, education facilities, and healthcare services to accommodate the influx of new life. "We need to think long-term," he advised during one such meeting. "These children will grow quickly, and we need to be prepared for their needs at every stage of development." As Greg worked to address these new challenges, Princess Vox took on a crucial role in Queen Zara's government. Serving as the chief liaison between the Nigean royal family and the human diplomatic corps, she brought a unique perspective to the ongoing negotiations. During a joint press conference with Greg, Vox addressed the gathered crowd, her young daughter cradled in her arms. "Our two species have come together in ways we never imagined possible," she said, her voice carrying across the assembled humans and Nigans. "My daughter is a living proof of what we can achieve when we work together." The success of the Taren factor treatment on Nige did not go unnoticed by the wider galactic community. Diplomatic envoys from various alien worlds began arriving on the planet, eager to establish relations and learn more about the groundbreaking medical advancement. Greg found himself thrust into a new role as de facto ambassador to these alien visitors. He led tours of the treatment centers, explained the intricacies of human-Nigean cooperation, and fielded countless questions about the potential applications of the Taren factor on other worlds. During one such tour with a delegation from a distant aquatic species, Greg received an urgent communication from Earth. The holographic image of his superior, Ambassador Jameson, appeared before him. "Greg, we need to talk," Jameson said, his face serious. "The success on Nige has opened up new possibilities for human influence in the galaxy. We're considering offering the Taren factor treatment to other species facing similar crises." Greg's mind raced with the implications of this statement. "Sir, are you saying—" "We want you to lead a new interstellar diplomatic mission," Jameson confirmed. "Your experience on Nige makes you the ideal candidate to establish contact with these species and potentially expand our influence throughout the galaxy." As Greg processed this monumental offer, a commotion broke out nearby. He turned to see a group of Nigean parents rushing towards him, their faces a mix of excitement and concern. "Ambassador Nash," one of them called out, "you need to see this." They led Greg to a nearby nursery where several Nigean children born through the Taren factor treatment were playing. As he watched, he noticed something strange. One of the children, a young girl no more than a few months old, was exhibiting physical traits that appeared more human than Nigean. Greg's heart raced as he realized the implications of what he was seeing. The Taren factor treatment was having unexpected effects on Nigean evolution, and he knew this development would reignite fears among some segments of the population. As he stood there, caught between the promise of a new galactic mission and the growing complications on Nige, Greg understood that the challenges he faced were just the beginning. The fragile alliance he had worked so hard to build was once again at risk, and the fate of two species, perhaps even the entire galaxy, hung in the balance. With a deep breath, Greg straightened his shoulders and prepared to face the storm he knew was coming. The next steps he took would shape the future of human-Nigean relations and potentially change the course of galactic history. Greg stared at the Nigean child, his mind racing with the implications of what he was seeing. The young girl's scales were interspersed with patches of smooth, human-like skin, and her eyes had a distinctly human shape while retaining the vibrant colors typical of Nigeans. "How long has she been exhibiting these traits?" Greg asked the anxious parents. "They've become more pronounced over the past few weeks," the father replied, his scales shimmering with concern. "Is this normal?" Greg took a deep breath. "I'm not sure, but we're going to find out. I need to convene an emergency meeting with the Joint Council immediately." Within hours, Greg had assembled a diverse group of human and Nigean experts in the council chambers. Princess Vox sat beside him, her presence a calming influence amidst the tension in the room. Dr. Chen and Dr. Zorn, the lead scientists on the Taren Factor project, stood before the gathering, their faces a mix of excitement and apprehension. "We've conducted extensive examinations on the affected children," Dr. Chen began, her voice steady. "What we've found is extraordinary. She gestured to a holographic display which showed detailed scans of the hybrid children's physiology. These changes are not detrimental. In fact, they represent an unexpected evolutionary leap. Dr. Zorn stepped forward, his scales shimmering with excitement. The hybrid children are developing traits that combine the best aspects of both human and Nigean physiology. Their immune systems are remarkably robust, capable of fighting off diseases from both worlds. The room erupted in murmurs as council members absorbed this information. Greg leaned forward, his interest piqued. What about their cognitive abilities? Dr. Chen nodded, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Preliminary tests show enhanced problem-solving skills and accelerated learning capabilities. These children are processing information at rates we've never seen before. As the scientists continued their presentation, detailing the physical adaptations that allowed the hybrid children to thrive in both Earth-like and Nigean environments, Greg's mind raced with possibilities. He glanced at Princess Vox, who met his gaze with a mixture of wonder and grit. When the presentation concluded, the council chamber erupted into heated debate. Some members expressed concern about the long-term implications of these changes, while others saw it as a miraculous opportunity for both species. Greg stood, his presence commanding attention. What we're witnessing here is not just the success of the Taren factor treatment, he said, his voice carrying across the room. It's the birth of a new chapter in the story of our two species. He paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. I propose we establish a joint human Nigean colony on a newly discovered planet, capable of supporting both our species. This colony will serve as a testing ground for long-term coexistence and allow us to study the development of these remarkable children in a controlled environment. The council chamber fell silent as the members considered Greg's proposal. Queen Zara was the first to speak. An ambitious plan, Ambassador Nash. But how do you propose we implement such a massive undertaking? Greg outlined his vision, detailing the resources required from both Earth and Nige, the selection process for colonists, and the potential scientific advancements that could arise from this unprecedented cooperation. After hours of intense discussion and debate, the council voted. Greg's proposal was approved, and preparations for the new colony began immediately. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Greg found himself at the center of a massive logistical operation, coordinating resources and personnel from both planets. As news of the colony spread, volunteers from both species came forward in droves, eager to be part of this historic endeavor. Amidst the chaos of preparation, Princess Vox went into labor. Greg rushed to the medical center, his heart pounding with anticipation. Hours later, he found himself staring in awe at two tiny beings, twins, one exhibiting primarily Nigean traits and the other showing more human characteristics. They're perfect, Vox whispered, her scales shimmering with joy as she cradled the newborns. Greg gently stroked the cheek of the more human-looking twin, marveling at the softness of its skin. They're the future, he replied, his voice thick with emotion. As the day of departure approached, Greg faced a personal dilemma. He'd been offered the position of lead administrator for the new colony, but accepting meant leaving behind everything he'd known on Earth. One evening, as he stood on the balcony of their shared quarters, gazing at the alien sky of Nige, Vox joined him. You're troubled, she observed, her hand finding his. Greg sighed. I want to go. I believe in this mission more than anything I've ever done. But Earth is your home, Vox finished for him. He turned to face her, taking in her iridescent scales and the understanding in her eyes. Earth was my home, he corrected gently. But now, home is wherever you and our children are. The day of departure arrived with a mix of excitement and trepidation. Greg stood at the base of the massive colony ship, overseeing the final boarding procedures. Humans and Nigeans alike filed into the vessel, their faces a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. As Greg and Vox prepared to board with their twins, a commotion near the ship's entrance caught their attention. A group of protesters had broken through the security perimeter, their scales dark with anger. Stop this madness, one of them shouted. You'll destroy both our species. Greg handed the twins to Vox and approached the group, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. I understand your fears, he said calmly. Change is always frightening. But what we're doing here isn't about destroying our species. It's about creating something new and beautiful. He gestured to the ship behind him. On this vessel, and on the new world we're traveling to, we have the opportunity to build a future that honors the best of both our cultures. We're not losing who we are. We're becoming something more. As Greg spoke, he noticed the anger in the protesters' eyes slowly giving way to curiosity and, in some cases, hope. By the time he finished, the tension had dissipated, and several of the protesters stepped back, lowering their signs. With the situation defused, Greg rejoined Vox and their children. Together, they boarded the ship, ready to embark on the greatest adventure of their lives. As the colony ship lifted off, crowds on both Earth and Nige watched in awe. The massive vessel rose into the sky, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of two worlds. Inside the ship, Greg stood at a viewport, watching as Nige grew smaller in the distance. Vox joined him, their twins cradled in her arms. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, her voice a mix of excitement and apprehension. Greg turned to her, a smile spreading across his face. "With you by my side, I'm ready for anything." As the ship accelerated towards its destination, Greg felt a profound sense of purpose wash over him. The journey ahead would be filled with challenges, but also with incredible opportunities for growth and discovery. With Vox and their children beside him, and a ship full of brave pioneers ready to build a new world, Greg knew that the greatest chapter of their story was just beginning.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.